Are live. Super. Nisi Shawl. I think it's still going. One second.
It says it's streaming live now. That's
Perfect.
what it says.
I am so excited to have you and speak with you. I know we spoke a little bit last week, so the conversation started naturally flowing. So I appreciate your time. I wanted to just the first question to hit you with, or send you, not hit you with. I don't know why the language is so violent.
Uh,
Uh, it's crazy how language can be so violent. But okay, so what has been the most fulfilling element of your journey as a writer thus far? Would you
the
say?
most fulfilling.
Yeah.
Gosh, getting recognized, and I'm not talking about like, awards and stuff. I'm talking about like people are their lives are changed by what I do. That's been the most rewarding by far. Um, when so I guess that's not just recognition, it's like influence. Yeah, because that's what I'm in it for, really. Yeah.
What I guess if when you mean influence, do you mean like people's like how they engage your work and how they engage your ideas and how they engage your just stories and how they're changed and transformed by those stories?
Yes. Yeah. Everything from like the emotional impact to, well, in some of my nonfiction, getting encouraged by things that I have to say in that and trying different attitudes towards life and just really having a practical impact on people's work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like that's the most fulfilling thing too. It's like you're sort of raising consciousness. You're allowing people to have unique experiences that are different. What would you say it fueled your like you wanting to become a writer or you beginning to write? Like what was that for you in that journey? Because I feel like there is definitely a continuum because I remember when I first started writing, like I didn't necessarily write to change or transform people's like or to see how people engage my work. It came at a later point where I was like, wow,
Yeah.
this is there's a responsibility here. Uh,
Yeah, no, I think so. My idea of what it's like to be a writer is it's sort of rooted in when people would ask me when I was a child what I wanted to do. And my response was, I wanted to be a magician.
mm.
Right. And then they would say, oh, you mean like get up on a stage and pull rabbits out of hats? And I'm like, no, 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 no. I want to actually do real magic. And writing is pretty much like that for me. So that's what got me into it in the first place is you're constructing these worlds, creating these situations, these people are coming to life in your creativity. So yeah, that was the initial impetus. And then when I was in college, there was this wave of feminist science fiction, like Joanna Russ. And the one that really got me was Susie McKee Charnas. She wrote this novel called Walk to the End of the World. The premise of that novel is that civilization is restarted by the people who are saved under this mountain. They actually do have like a mountain in Colorado with like where US bureaucrats and their secretaries are supposed to go in the event of disaster. So her premise was what kind of society would come out of that? And it was rather grim, but at the same time, it was so audacious. And I thought, wow, I could actually get paid to do stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
little did I know how much the pay was. It's kind of diddly squat, but yeah.
No, I think you bring up a really good point. It's just this sort of, I love the idea of like when you hear like like spelling, or when you're like, even in the word spell, you're casting a spell when you're
Yeah.
spelling words into being. And I feel like you can definitely influence people's mind and conscious. I think I've
Yeah.
come to I think I've come to terms like the most fundamental form of change is in our imagination. It kind of, that our imagination kind of ties with our body, our hearts, and our minds. And it's like there's these boundaries, these limiters. And I think those radical thoughts, I guess, what fuels like your visions for your like your art, like focusing on black and brown like characters, or like the history that you've experienced of this country. Like what would you say is some of the things that fuels, well, I guess, what is your artistic vision? I guess, what do you hope to create, or what do you create when you set out to write?
Well, I don't necessarily have, as far as I know, I don't have an integrated vision that goes across all my different works. I do tend to go back to certain elements again and again, community, empathy,
Mm.
just, yeah, those two mainly. And so that kind of thing is what I write about. And I write about Black and brown people because I'm Black. And so this is I'm drawing on my own experience, and then I reflect on how other people's experience relates to mine. So again, it's the empathy in the community, and Everfair, which is my only published novel, not my first novel, but my only published novel, is about a bunch of different communities coming together in the Congo region of Africa.
Mm.
And so some of those people are representative of my demographics, and some of them are not. They're just completely different. But I'm trying to see how the relationships and ties work rather than the differences.
Hmm. Did you have to research a lot for that,
Oh
or
gosh, yes.
what was
And
that
some of
process?
the research was impossible. I mean, because the area that I was writing about, it was pretty much wiped out. The people that lived there, okay, so the term decimated has evolved to mean wiped out completely. It's not. It just means that you wipe out 9 of the 10 and you leave the 10th. So that area was decimated, and trying to find out what kind of things were going on in the historical period I was writing about, that's a challenge.
Absolutely. And that's like pre-colonization, right?
It's right at the time of colonization. And so, yeah, sure, you can find out from the colonizers what they thought was going on.
That's always reliable.
I hear the sarcasm there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, wow, that's really, really powerful. Like, do you feel like, did you feel like you had to create an entire new world in that process? And like
Well, no, I mean, I did a bunch of triangulation, like, um, there was actually an expedition of people who went into the area that I'm primarily writing about at around the time that I was writing about. So I do have some of their records, but again, it's the colonizers. And then I have uh, like YouTube videos of people who live there now. And
mm,
so, that's not going to be exactly identical with what was happening 110 years ago.
Mm.
but it's something to go with and to sort of extrapolate from.
Totally. Yeah, and I had a question. I'm like, so I'm reading from, I'm gonna be honest, I'm reading from a list and I'll be free flowing. Like what is like the relationship do you feel is the relationship between like science fiction, world building and our culture and like building our culture? Do you feel like there's a syncretic connection between all three of those elements? Or
Between science fiction,
world
world
building,
building,
world building
and
and culture in our culture?
in our culture. Well, what is our culture? That's the question. I
Mm.
mean, because there's more than one culture out there, and there's enormous differences, and you can participate in more than one culture within your life. So, what are we asking about there?
No,
Um,
I think that's a great point. I think the context of our culture, I'm looking at it like as just the broader, like mainstream ways of how people sort of perceive themselves and others. Because I always feel like there's this sort of macro consciousness, collective consciousness. I guess we
ah,
could call culture the collective consciousness, how people, and we know that's very, like you just said, it's very fragmented. There's multiple truths and there's different groups of people that believe different things. But I would almost say like, I guess that mainstream that where a lot of people are sort of shifted by the introduction of a film or of a book or of a story into that mainstream sort of, if it's like a
okay, so you're talking about like the dominant narrative, I guess. See,
absolutely.
I do think of it in writing terms. But yeah, but like what are people tweeting about, for instance? Or um so how does that relate to science fiction and world building? Well, anybody that wants to try and do world building in science fiction is very well served by observing how culture sort of is dispersed and disseminated, and what things come to the surface and what things just kind of fall by the wayside, and how they do that when they resurface. So definitely replicating that process is a sign of good world building in science fiction, I think.
Hmm. Would you
Have
have
you
any?
have
No,
you
I mean,
done that?
what'd you say?
Have you done that yourself in your world building?
Definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. I feel like the world building itself it is an immense undertaking. Like you're diving in and you're creating like things out of thin air. I think like I'm working on a work of fiction now. It's historical fiction, and
Ooh.
I've had to like go back into the past and really look. It's around like the like Saint-Domingue and the Haitian Revolution, and like
Ooh.
really diving into that world and trying to understand what it means. Because it's like, to what point, it's like, do I stay true to the history or do I stay true to do I stay loyal to the fantasy or do I stay loyal to the characters? It's like, and then to what point all of this, all of these things are sort of interwoven and then shared to the popular culture, which I think that has been sort of a very difficult undertaking.
Yeah, Everfair is an alternate history, so I tried to stay true to the characters. And
Mm.
if the history changes, that's another world. Sorry, I need to check my phone because someone just texted me, and I have all these issues coming up with my nieces and nephews.
No worries, no worries.
Okay, yeah, my oldest nephew, who lives in Georgia, is he's worried that he has COVID. So
No.
yeah, and so he's going to get a test tomorrow. But
Wow. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, that
yeah,
is definitely a stress. Just this the times that were. Did you grow up in Georgia?
no,
Or
no. My family, we're from Michigan, Kalamazoo, Michigan.
okay.
And but we kind of spread out. My youngest niece is living next door to me,
Oh,
My uh, middle sister is living in the Washington, D.C. area. We're everywhere.
nice.
Yeah.
I was in DC for the last 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
So
Julie, she's actually in Alexandria.
okay, I'm very familiar, very, very familiar.
Yeah.
What was like like when did that spark sort of like rise in your mind? Like what was that first book that you picked up or that first story that like inspired you to start in Kalamazoo? Like do you remember
What made me think that I could write?
yeah, yeah.
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I was always writing. I was writing in junior high school. I was writing science fiction in junior high school and not comic books. I mean, I was like actually writing like post-apocalyptic, you know, love stories and I don't know that it was caused actually by a book. I mean, there was a ton of books that I read, and again, they were mostly fantasy and science fiction
Mm.
um, when I was younger, but I don't know that anyone just made me think you can do it. I just did it. I had a friend, Karen Smith, and she and I like made plays together, and we wrote our own lyrics to songs and that kind of stuff. It was just, I mean, why not?
Absolutely.
Trying to think. That's because I have never been able to pin it down. My father used to tell me stories about dragons.
Really?
Yes.
Tell me more about that.
Well, so my father's name is Dennis, and he would do these stories. He would hold his hands like a book and pretend to read, and then he
Mm.
would read these stories that, I'd look at his hands and there was nothing there, about a witch and her pet dragon named Applesauce.
Wow.
And he was good at it. Um, I've seen his writing since as an adult. Nothing about the dragon applesauce. I don't know what happened to applesauce.
That's super creative. Wow.
Yeah.
And he was African American?
Oh yeah, yeah. My family is African American, like for 5 generations back, as long as anybody can tell. There
Wow.
was someone who they were saying they were Indian, and then suddenly there's like this Trail of Tears scam going on in there. Oh, nope, I'm Black.
Yeah, it's interesting how like when history, it's like, yeah, the how identity shifts and what we claim and what we don't claim depending on
Yes.
situations.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't, I'm sure, you can, anybody who can look at me can see that I'm very light skinned. So yeah, there's got to be some white ancestry in there somewhere. But they did not happen recently.
Yeah. And I know we spoke a little bit about Octavia Butler, and you said that you knew her personally. Like I
Yeah.
feel like her name is popping more and more and more in the cultural mainstream as this sort of figure around like speculative fiction, science fiction. Like, can you tell a little bit more if you have a few stories or like what was that experience kind of collaborating, writing, engaging, and how has she influenced your work or have you influenced her work? Because I was telling you on the phone the other day, like you wrote the introduction to the Library of Congress collection of stories that they gathered together, which was a really powerful introduction.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Yes. I first met Octavia because I had done the write up, the bio about her for the program of a science fiction convention where she was the guest of honor. So as part of the deal, they let me go for free, and I met her, And I remember looking up at her, because you were almost always looking up at her, very tall woman. And I looked up at her and I said, wow, you're much more beautiful than I thought you would be. Which was not me trying to like get on her good side. This was me being in awe of meeting her. So she eventually moved to Seattle, the Seattle area here where I live. She liked the climate. She liked the rain and the cloudiness, as compared to where she had grown up in the LA, California area. She moved here, and we got to go to plays together, go to restaurants together, just hang out. She was a vegetarian, she was vegan. So, we would go and try out different vegan restaurants. She would have me over to dinner. I would have her over to dinner. She came to an Ancestor Feast I did one time.
Oh.
Now, Octavia was an atheist. I mean, she just was, but she was polite enough so that she would come and, we're like singing chants to the Egun, to all the ancestors, and she's like joining in. So that was wonderful. I don't know what else to tell you. I never collaborated with her on writing anything, but I did talk with her on the phone several times. We would talk about problems that were coming up in our work. I was in awe, and my career was just beginning, so it was more me listening to her talk about her problems. Yeah, she did ask me one time. So she had a series of books that was being repackaged. The name for the series originally was the Xenogenesis trilogy. And her publisher wanted it renamed and repackaged and all this stuff. And she was saying, well, they're mostly centered around this woman Lilith and her offspring, but I want it to sound a little ominous and kind of creepy too. So I can't just say Lilith's kids. I said, what about Lilith's brood? And that's what she gave to the publishers, and they were happy with it too. And that's what they called the repackaging of the Xenogenesis trilogy. So that's a definite direct influence that I had on her, but mostly it was the other way around.
No, that's so amazing. That's really, really powerful. But I feel like one word that keeps like popping in my brain of everything that you said is the Ancestor's Feast. I've never heard of an Ancestor's Feast. Tell me more about that, if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit.
Oh, no, that's no problem at all. So I didn't do it this year, but most years I do a thing called the Ancestor Feast, which is I do divination. I come up with as many dishes from as many countries and cultures as possible. And, I'll say like, should I bring you all some lamb chops? And, I will get a good answer for that. So the menu comes from divination for, what the ancestors would want. Then I just cook up as much as I can, serve it to as many people as I can. And we tell stories about my ancestors, their ancestors. We sing songs for them. It's just a real joyous occasion.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like definitely, I feel like when I moved to the US, like I definitely was like searching for just like a cosmology, a form of thinking, a way of being, or in French they call it l'imaginaire. They're just a way of thinking. I feel like my engagement with the ancestors has been a profound experience, where it's almost as if it's like I don't, it's the Maya Angelou. It says like, I come as one, but I stand with 10,000, or
Yeah.
this idea of like this sort of unbroken connection with the past, but also the future, but you're
Yes.
moving towards that process. Would you say like that the ancestors and that energetic force, has it influenced your writing? Has it influenced your vision of like the future and how things are changing right now?
Well, a couple of things. When I write, I generally invoke the ancestors to help me. I
Mm.
just do because, yeah, they have messages and they can help me sharpen my message. The other thing is, I don't know if you're aware of a couple of writers, Adrienne Marie Brown and
Yeah,
Walida. Yeah.
emergent
So
strategies.
they say, Walida and Marisha, they say that what we are science fiction. As
Mm.
far as our ancestors are concerned, they, we are like what they were dreaming of. We are living a
Mm.
life that they would have been like, oh, really? You're riding around in a car,
Mm.
You get to eat fruit from California when you're not in California. It's
Mm.
we are walking science fiction, and so there's a connection there. And then about going on into the future, I'm sure that they had dreams that went past us.
Mm. That's powerful. Yeah, it's like getting something. Yeah, I think it is interesting. It's like when you start to have this this cosmology that is all expensive. It's outside, it's almost outside time and space. I think it starts to sort of diffuse a lot of the day-to-day stress or
Mm,
problems, or even
yeah.
like I think I don't know, I would love to hear your thought, but I think it creates a new humanism to it. Makes you more human and appreciate other people who are different than you or think differently than you. Um, I don't know. Very
Yeah, well,
cool.
it puts things in perspective, doesn't it? Yeah.
It really does. It really does. I wonder what like I guess in terms of the future itself, like what like I think what is the role of like Black speculative arts and fiction and its ability to shape something that has yet to be? Like, what do you feel like that is the role? Because again, we talked a little bit about the mainstream. We also talked about cultural streams that are more on the margins. And I wouldn't say that they're on the margins because you have to own up to who you are and your people and your experience, and that's the center. I
Yeah.
think I think it was a quote by Toni Morrison. She was like, I it's sort of like I work, I'm gonna butcher it, but she was saying like I work at the margin and I claimed it as my center and I let the world just move over. And I really love that. So I'd love to hear like from like in terms of your perspective of how you, because you're sort of like integrated into the science fiction and speculative fiction community, like how do you see more diverse and Black voices start to shape like the world in a way, or what role do you think that it plays?
Well, it's crucial, it's pivotal. I'm actually, as well as a writer, I'm an editor, and I'm in the midst of editing the second volume of an anthology series called New Sons, which is, by the way, taken from a quotation made by Octavia Butler.
Mm.
Uh, she said, "There's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns." And
Mm.
that pretty much sums it up. New Sons is Black, Asian, Latinx, Indian, all sorts of different voices. And I'm now in the middle, as I said, of doing New Sons 2. New Sons 1, people kept trying to say, is there something in common, some theme that unites all this stuff? And the only thing I could think of is that what's united here is that everything is like really wildly different from everything else, you know, and there were stories. There was sort of like an undertone of like, you know, tourists coming to Earth, or tourists going to the islands, and that sort of thing. But overall, it was just, some stuff was sort of alternate history, some of it was horror, and there were all these different kinds of protagonists and situations. And I think that the variety is crucial to keeping science fiction, fantasy, and horror relevant, you know, because if you don't have all these different voices, then you don't even know what you're missing.
Absolutely. And there's a danger as well in not having those different voices, because you start to see the world in one direction, and all those biases and
Yeah.
those realities kind of seep into the stories.
Yeah. And you don't necessarily even know that they're there unless you have this kind of reality check.
It's so interesting. It's like how I guess I'm looking at it from the context of like racism or hate or prejudice, because we know like during the pandemic there was a lot of racial reckoning that was happening with the US. I don't know if it's gonna change, but I do know people are talking more about it. Like many years ago, I never would have imagined, quote unquote, the mainstream would be talking about anti-racism or what it means to be an anti-racist. Um, I think things are changing, but I do wonder, like, how can someone live their entire life and not know, let's say, the live experience of someone that is like radically different? Maybe there is an answer to that, but I almost feel like it's like you have to choose to be ignorant in the times that we're living in. And I don't know, I just feel like storytelling has such an important role to play in kind of breaking those barriers.
Storytelling is vital to it. And story listening, story hearing,
Mm,
is because of all the things that create empathy, you know, there are certain chemicals in your brain that create it, but the stories can help you create those chemicals.
mm.
So you can make your own empathy happen. I have said, I think in an essay I wrote recently, that stories are empathy machines.
Mm.
That's what they are. And you just have to make sure that you get a wide variety of them from a wide variety of voices.
Mm. I really like that. Yeah, that's empathy machine. I think I'm gonna take this to the rest to the day I die. I feel like I love this. That's very powerful. I really like what you're saying about story listening, story hearing. It's like it's not just like reading, or it's like you have to be able to like see through it, or you have to let the story see you or see the story. It's almost as if it's a form of literacy through a different
Yes.
like lens. Like, what would you say is, like, I guess, what is the role of literacy in that? How do we sharpen our literacy when we live such I get so happy when I see someone reading a book. You have no idea, but I feel like there's less and less people. Maybe I'm not hanging out with the crowd of people that read more books, but I guess do you believe that engaging science fiction or speculative fiction or fantasy literacy, how do we create that shift? Because I know there's a lot of genre snobbery in terms of like, oh, the genre and the art, but I
Whatever.
wonder, or just say,
I
yeah.
said, whatever.
So
Oh,
how
the
do
genre snobbery. I'm so over it.
so how do
No, I was just going to say, I think there's all kinds of literacy. And actually, I had a roommate at one point who talked about how shopping at a food co-op illustrated a sort of literacy
Hmm.
because you understood that you were supposed to mark down the prices and the item numbers and everything, and you knew how to get stuff in bulk and all of this kind of stuff. You were able to translate acronyms into what they actually meant. So I think that there are more kinds of literacy, and I'm not disturbed that there are people who don't read.
Hmm.
I actually think that we're living in a time when more people read than have read in other historical periods, right? It's there have been times when it was denied as a right.
Hmm.
There have been times when it just wasn't available, that no one had access to reading. When it was like the purview of a priest or somebody like that.
Hmm.
So I am fine if people want it, and if they don't want it, then that means their intelligence lies elsewhere.
Hmm.
Um, there are people who are very, very visually literate in a way that I am not.
Wow.
For instance, I don't know if you read comic books or graphic novels at all. I have a really hard time with them because I keep looking at the words. And I know you're supposed to be looking at, like, the flow of the action and the lines that are going from panel to panel. And I'm just like, but the words, the words, the words. And so if other people can see it in a different way, I'm fine with that. And I think that storytelling can happen with music.
Hmm.
I think it can happen with dance. And so let's have some science fiction music and some science fiction dance.
Absolutely. No, I think that's so powerful what you're saying. It's like there's different, it's so true. There is different modalities of learning or
Yeah.
engaging the mind or growing. That is very true. And there's different ways of being literate within our own. Like it's almost as if it's like where Emerson talks about the aboriginal self. It's like you have to know yourself enough to be able to know what is the modality of learning that is best suited to you. Yeah,
Yeah.
because I do learn a lot through just watching YouTube or a lot of films, as opposed to reading, which I read as well. But that is interesting. That definitely shifted my mindset there because I was like, why are people not reading? But you're like, I know actually there are different ways of consuming or growing our mind. That is
Yeah.
powerful. So
Yeah.
I guess so you bring up a really good point in terms of, oh, why not have science fiction music? So I guess how the different mediums of how speculative fiction or even a fictional world can be expressed, whether it's textual, whether it's animated,
Yeah.
episodic, or even visual. Like, I guess how have you seen this in your work? Like, have you had your work adapted to, like, let's say, a visual capacity as a comic, or have you, like, do you see if your work has been adapted, let's say, to different mediums? Like, do you see like your fans and how they engage that work? Do they engage it differently, or have you seen a variety around that, or no?
Not yet, but a television series is my dream forever fair. And it may actually come to pass. I have long, long wanted people to do some sort of cosplay with my work too. But I've come to realize that just simply describing what people are wearing is not enough. People want the visual cue. So that'll have to wait until a movie or TV series or a graphic novel. Um, John Jennings has been talking to me about doing a graphic novel with some of my work. So that would be fine with me. Nobody has made any music out of my science fiction, but whenever I do a public appearance a reading, I'll sing a song at the same time, just to try and get something musical happening with the words as well.
Definitely. And I feel like connecting back to the ancestors and like the African like historicalness of things, it's like I think rhythm and music are like play such a pivotal process in that in that engagement.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. They're very closely tied, and I'm really jealous of musicians, I have to tell you. If I could just make people feel the way that music makes me feel, I will be very happy.
Mm. That is so true. Yeah, like I was in a band in DC for about 2 years and a half before I moved to LA. But like as a singer, like just being able to see people bobbing their heads or like
Yeah,
it's almost as if it's a transcendent. It's if it's like a science fiction thing, it's like you're getting people into your world and
yes,
everyone is connected outside of gender, race, class. Back you're all and I could say it's the same thing with the story though. It's like it's different people from different backgrounds are reading your character and they identify with this main character. It's almost as if you're sort of taking them into a journey too. But I guess music is more like is like very direct and it's like 2 minutes.
yeah, it's very immediate. Yeah, yeah.
Very immediate. What would you say to a someone that wants to be a writer or who wants to be a creator, who wants to create more works of art, but they don't have the motivation to do it or they don't have the accountability to do it? Like how would you, and I guess maybe speaking from your own creative process, like how do you like keep yourself motivated or accountable to do the types of work? Because I can imagine people are listening in and they have read your work and they have dabbled, they've thought about writing, or maybe they've written a few short stories here and there. But what would you say to your younger self, to put it even more personal?
Oh, to put to my younger self, it would be quite different because my younger
Okay.
self was always motivated. But
Mm.
trying to talk to someone who is not motivated and wants to write, I would say, yeah, then you don't want to write. You know, because I mean, there are tough parts and there are easy parts. And somehow I seem to be fine with having both of them. And I mean, okay, so here's something that happens with almost every writer that makes it. They have moments where they think, I am as a god, I am glorious. No one can touch the supernal fineness of my writing. And then they also have, sometimes within the same hour, those moments where they think, holy mother of God, what did I think I was trying to do? This is like complete dreck. This is garbage. You know, this should be like at the bottom of the outhouse pit. Just yeah, and it'll be about the same piece of work, and that is something that I have seen in every writer that has made it somehow. And you just have to ride with it. You just have to accept that, you know, sometimes you are going to be happy with what you do, and sometimes you're going to be like really embarrassed that you even have the same name as the person that tried to do that.
what would you define as made it? What does made it mean in your mind?
In my mind, made it means I am writing and I am affecting other people with my writing, which means that other people have a chance to read it.
Mm.
So it's not that you make a living from it. It's not that you are like on the New York Times bestseller list, but you are writing and reaching people with your writing. That's what I mean by made it. And you keep doing it.
Definitely. Yeah, this has been really great, Nisi, to talk to you and hear your visions and your passion. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. I wonder, I guess you're in terms of final thoughts, like where where do you feel like we're headed as a if there is a publishing industry or a storytelling industry or I don't want to say culture or I would say community, if there's a community of science fiction and fantasy, like where do you feel that it's headed in terms of the next year, 2 years, or 3 years, in terms of your intuitions? um it's a broad question, but
Well, I think that where it's going is going to be determined by who wants to get there. Um, so, I mean, by that, some people want to be in a community and some people want to be loners. And so getting somewhere as a community means being inclusive, but also being tolerant of others being outside the community. That's just, some people are just, there's a spectrum, and I am not much of an extrovert, but many people think of me as an extrovert compared to what they're like. So, you know, I'm not like living in a fire watch tower in Yosemite or something like that. But there are people like that, right?
yeah.
So having a community in a time like this, to me, it's very important. And I think to the majority of the science fiction world, it is important, but it's not important to everyone, and we should just go with that. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, that totally makes sense. I like it's like it's almost as if it's like it's almost the elements. It's like this is the way, but it's not also not the way, because there's other ways to do it, and every way is a way, is the
Oh
way.
yeah. Well, that is the one piece of writing advice I can actually give, is that you should try all the different ways that people tell you to do stuff, and then figure out which ones don't work for you and get rid of them. So for instance, Octavia Butler told me to write every day. Now I don't, and I never have, and I probably never will. And Steve Barnes says the same thing, but for me, that does not work. For me, writing is something that I do, that I save up, like maybe there may be 2 or 3 days where I don't write. And then I come back and I write. So, then there will be people who say, you have to write in a cafe, and other people will say, no, you have to write complete solitude, have music playing, no music, you know. So try it all and see what works for you, and expect it to change.
Absolutely. Was it Octavia that said change is God?
Yes. Well, one of her characters.
Oh, one
God
of
is change. Yeah.
Change, yeah.
Yep.
Powerful. Where can the viewers reach you on your socials? Where are you most active?
I'm split my time mostly between Twitter and Facebook, which I know they're, you know, horrible and fascist in so many ways, but especially Facebook, I seem to be able to connect to my far-flung genetic family more easily. And Twitter, I can occasionally post just little quotes or teasers for the stuff I'm working on right now, which I would like to read you one of those, if I may.
Yeah, please, yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Let's see if I can find this. It was on Twitter. And yeah. Can't we dispense with this ridiculous notion that I'm dead just because my original body stopped breathing? That's something I wrote today.
I like it.
But I can't tell you who says it, because that would spoil the whole book. It's towards the end of the book.
I have a lot of questions. What genre is the book?
Oh, this is a sequel to Everfair. It's
Oh,
called Kinning, Kinning.
that's exciting. Are you able to tell how many words that you were aiming for the sequel?
How many words for the sequel? Probably around 113,000, and I'm at about 107,000 now.
Okay.
Really close to the end.
That's exciting. I know we're about to end the interview, but I have like so many more questions. Like, I guess, what is your process after you, let's say you reach 113 next week? What do you,
Sorry. I'm a very slow writer.
no, I think that's perfect. That's fine. I think there's no, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, some writers I can pump out books in like 3 or 4 months, but yeah, yeah, I understand. I guess, what is the process post first draft? Do you submit it to like alpha readers? Do you send it directly to the editor? Or do you self-edit?
Oh,
Um,
of course I self-edit. I don't know many writers that are able to not edit. And I have my critique group, so I have readers in that, and I have done some revision based on their notes over the 18 months that I've been working on this thing. Once I have this draft, I have to send it to the editor. I'm on my 5th deadline. So I got to send it to them by January 16. And then
wow.
they will have, I'm sure, things that they want me to change, and we'll just go from there.
That's so exciting and inspiring. Wow. That's amazing. Nisi, this has been a great, great, great pleasure to hear your stories, your ideas, your philosophy, your creative process, everything, all of the above. Thank you again. And I'm going to stop the live process now. And thank you for everyone.